Hello everyone, I'm back with another book, that is Jayantha Mahapatra's poem, Grandfather. Grandfather, published in 1980. Jayantha Mahapatra, 1928-2023. Jayantha Mahapatra's poem, Grandfather, is included in his celebrated poetry collection titled Relationship, published in 1980. Jayantha Mahapatra is one of India's most prominent modern poets, known for his evocative and deeply personal poetry. Grandfather is a reflective poem that explores themes of history, identity, colonialism, and personal heritage. The poem focuses on the poet's grandfather, a man who transitioned from servitude under British rule to becoming an independent figure. Mahapatra often blends personal experiences with a historical and social commentary. This poem is not just a tribute to his grandfather, but also a meditation on Indian history, colonization, and the struggles of past generations. The poet expresses admiration, nostalgia, and a sense of loss, making this a deeply introspective work. Summary of the work. Grandfather is a narrative poem in which the speaker recalls the life of his grandfather, exploring his struggles and transformation over time. Introduction to the grandfather's struggles. The poem begins with a description of the grandfather's hardships under British rule. He is portrayed as a man who suffered but endured, embodying resilience and perseverance. Colonial influence and servitude. The poem touches on the grandfather's role in a colonial India, highlighting how the British system affected individual lives. The speaker reflects on how his grandfather had to navigate an oppressive regime, perhaps even working for the British at some point. Transition to independence and a new identity. Despite his servitude, the grandfather managed to build a life for himself and his family. The poem describes his gradual shift from being a colonial subject to a more independent figure, symbolizing the transition of India itself. Poet's reflection on heritage and change. The speaker contrasts his own life with his grandfather's, feeling a disconnect from the struggles of the past. He questions whether he truly understands the sacrifices that led to his own existence and freedom. Sense of nostalgia and loss. The poem ends on a note of reflection as the speaker acknowledges the disappearance of his grandfather's world. He mourns the fading of old values and the loss of personal connection to history. Overall, the poem is both a homage to the grandfather and a meditation on history, colonialism, and a personal identity. The characters in the poem. First of all, the grandfather, the central figure of the poem, representing resilience and perseverance. He lived through British rule, adapting and surviving despite oppression. He is a symbol of India's colonial past and the struggles of an older generation. The next character is the speaker, who is the poet or grandson, reflects on his grandfather's life and its impact on his own identity, feels a mixture of admiration, distance, and a nostalgia, represents the modern generation, somewhat detached from the hardships of the past. The poem does not introduce many characters, but instead focuses on the deep relationship between the poet and his grandfather. Themes in the poem. Colonialism and its impact. The poem explores how colonial rule shaped individual lives, particularly through servitude, suffering, and adaptation. The grandfather's journey from oppression to self-sufficiency mirrors India's national history. Family, memory, and heritage. The poet tries to understand his grandfather's experiences and their impact on his own life. He expresses a longing for the past and a struggle to connect with his roots. Identity and a generational divide. The speaker questions his own identity in relation to his grandfather's legacy. He feels distant from the struggles of the past, highlighting the contrast between older and newer generations. Time and change. The poem reflects on how time erases personal and historical struggles, leading to a fading sense of connection. The poet mourns the loss of an era and the disappearance of values that shaped his grandfather's life. The setting of the poem. The poem is set partially in colonial India, depicting the grandfather's struggles under British rule. It also shifts to the modern perspective, where the poet reflects on the past from a more privileged position. The atmosphere is nostalgic, reflective, and deeply personal, creating a contrast between past hardships and present-day comfort. Personal versus historical narrative. The poem is both personal and political, blending family history with the larger context of colonial oppression. Critics appreciate Mahapatra's ability to turn one man's story into a reflection on national history. Use of imagery and symbolism. Mahapatra uses powerful imagery to depict the hardships, resilience, and at times impact on memory. The grandfather symbolizes endurance, while the speaker represents a generation that has moved away from those struggles. Emotional depth and nostalgia. The poem carries a deep sense of loss, highlighting how history and family traditions fade over time. The poet's regret and admiration creates an emotional weight, making the poem highly relatable. Free verse and a subtlety. Like much of Mahapatra's poetry, Grandfather is written in free verse, allowing a natural conversational tone. The lack of a rigid structure reflects the fluidity of memory and a personal reflection. Now let's go to the important lines in the poem. The yellowed diary's notes whisper in vernacular. The aged diary symbolizes fading heritage, preserving ancestral memory through the language of cultural roots. The next line. He lay inside, embraced by the walls of his grave. The line portrays death as both a confinement and a peace, emphasizing the idea of mortality and a separation from the living. The next line. He was the unbroken man. His story still breathes upon my pages. The grandfather's resilience lives on through memory, reflecting endurance, legacy, and familial continuity. The next line. And I ask myself, how much of me is my grandfather? The speaker questions inherited identity, revealing how ancestry shapes self-understanding and a belonging. The next line. Did the lonely man, his spirit vulnerable as a tamarind leaf in the evening breeze, vanish into the loneliness of the crowd? The image conveys fragility and existential isolation, reflecting life's transience amid oblivion. The next line. Grandfather, your voice resounds in the tumble bells. The line fuses memory with spirituality, suggesting ancestral presence echoing through sacred tradition. The next line. The dried up riverbed cracked and broken like his aging skin. The dried riverbed mirrors the grandfather's decline, symbolizing aging, loss, and impermanence. The next line. His ashes mixes with the dust unclaimed by history. The merging of ashes with the dust signifies forgotten lives, exploring obscurity and the fleeting nature of human existence.